Yeah, our next respondent is Öktem, another professor at the Center of Southeast European Studies. He focuses on modern Turkey. Karen came here only last autumn and from Oxford, which might tell you something about the relevance that this center has obtained in short time. And it was also at Oxford where he read his master's degree and where he completed his PhD thesis. And yeah, you focus on Turkey. That means more or less the angle between the Middle East and Southeast Europe. And that will be interesting to hear your specific view.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Of course, I think we've already heard so many exciting ideas and observations that I'd rather like to jump into the discussion of those ideas. But alas, I have a pre-prepared a script, which, however, does relate to the issues we've been discussing today very much, because it's based also on the paper which was published by Ivan in the Journal of Democracy, Exit, Noise and Disloyalty, which I would actually suggest you read, because it's an excellent tour through a liberal political theory with a vengeance, maybe. But now what I actually will try to do today is to complement Ivan's perspective on electoral behavior with the view of maybe saving a bit of it. I'll be doing this by referring to two notions which Ivan mentions in his article, From Politics to Protest is the subtitle, I think, which is the plebeian experience and the waning drama of elections, which you've also talked about. And I will do that with reference to Turkey, but also to Greece, and especially Greece's January 2015 elections and Turkey's upcoming general election on the 7th of June. So I will try to argue that there might be a case that promises, or of step from a protest back to politics. But let me start with the plebeian experience, which Ivan develops in reference to the French political thinker Martin Bréau. And this experience is very much an eruption of civic energy that does not crystallize into political parties or organizations, but leaves traces and keeps alive the hope that the world can be changed as a result of the collective action of citizens. Now, and then he continues, it is a moment, not a movement. It is an explosion of political subjectivity, and like any explosion, it is by definition cannot be sustained. And of course, when I first read that, I immediately thought of the description of Gezi Park, of the demonstrations in Gezi Park, to a lesser extent maybe also the Greek protests. You know, this outburst of political subjectivity, the encampments in the city center in Taksim Square, the building of a temporary civic commune, this explosion of creativity and solidarity, which we wrote a lot about also in the case of Turkey, but also, of course, a moment that could not have been sustained even if the police had not brutally intervened to put an end to the protests. For more than a year, then, after the protests, it appeared then in Istanbul, but also in Athens, this eruption of energy would simply ebb away. You know, but even to suggest that the protests would nevertheless leave some traces and hopes appeared as almost naive. And in fact, then you had the circles of election setting in, and again, here I'm referring to Ivan's paper, elections without the power to change things, what you call a collective celebration of powerlessness, neither mobilizes the passive frustrated nor pacifies the outraged. So in a way, it does not serve anymore the promise of leaving the future open, of bringing change. So, and that was your conclusion then, why vote if your vote is not going to make a difference? If you will still get an austerity package, whatever party you vote for in Greece, or if the party you most dislike is going to win anyway, like in Turkey. And of course, in Turkey, the local elections right after, or the few months after the Gezi events, reminded the protesters that the AKP remains the most powerful party, even though with 38% rather than 50%. But this was exactly the situation which Ivan described, which we had in Turkey and in Greece. But then something unexpected of sorts happened, I think. First in Greece, where the discontent of the protests found a political home in the form of a formerly communist party, which sort of rearticulated itself, of Syriza, and was thereby translated into political power. And it created a veritable challenge to the European consensus on austerity that was not supposed to have happened, as also German newspapers then remind us when they published their first pages in Greek, asking the Greeks not to vote for Syriza before the elections. And also important, this happened in an election with almost 70% voter turnout, which is for crisis-ridden Greece quite impressive. Then what happened in Turkey? A party with a minority ethno-nationalist history, the pro-Kurdish HDP, turned to embrace this plebeian moment of Gezi Park. It now represents pretty much all grievances of the protesters and a political program that is impressively progressive in social terms. It's open to pretty much all social movements, from the LGBT movement, feminists, Kurds, Armenians, Turks, anti-militarists, anti-nationalists, so pretty much all those people who were on the square and who could not have found a place in the existing party structure. With this policy, it seems to propel itself very close to the 10% threshold of Turkey's electoral law, which is of course completely undemocratic. But it created a massive challenge for the AKP, which will lose its majority and its power to change the constitution, that's its main aim, if the HDP wins and gets beyond the threshold of 10%. Because if that happens, if it doesn't happen, then most of those votes will go to the AKP. Now, the voter turnout is expected to be close to 90% in the next election. It was already above 85% in the last election. So in both countries, we seem to have here a comparable development which might be at least worth being interested in. I don't think it kind of falsifies any of your argument. But still, it's interesting. The eruption of civic energy, of this plebeian moment, is connected with political parties that themselves have been reshaped and re-articulated by the protests. In both cases, they reinstated something that had disappeared from the election. The promise of real change, i.e. an alternative to austerity or an alternative to AKP hegemony. And I'm just about to end with a few words on whether and how this articulation of civic energy and formal politics really constitutes a possibility of democratic change, which we have not been aware yet. Now, in Greece, of course, it became pretty clear pretty fast that policy on austerity cannot be made on the level of national Greek politics. It also transpires that Syriza operates very much in the mode of the clientelist politics, which Florian mentioned, and that seemed to remain prevalent in Greece, even in its socialist parties. And more importantly, Syriza has a problem with its Stalinist and xenophobic left heritage, which remains very much present in the party. Now, in Turkey, it might be even more complicated because the AKP government has clearly understood that challenge posed by the HDP is serious, and we've seen a series of violent attacks on HDP election offices that suggest that President Erdogan does not want to leave anything to chance this time. And the HDP also has to perform several balance acts between a socially conservative Kurdish core electorate and new social movements, and between its Kurdish nationalist roots with its organic ties to the PKK, of course, the Kurdish Liberation Movement, and with the claim to be an all-Turkey party. And it may, in the end, not make it over the 10% threshold, either due to vote rigging or because they simply cannot muster the 10%. I still believe, however, that in these two cases, we witness the emergence of a space of democratic potentialities thanks to the articulation of this civic moment, of this plebeian moment, and re-articulated and reinvigorated party politics. And such development, at least in theory, I think brings us from protest back to politics. Thanks.